So it's 2 o'clock and we will get going with our webinar. Let me welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar, The Wiggly World of Organisation, Leading Through Uncertainty with Purpose, Courage and Skill. And if you thought the unprecedented crisis we're facing with COVID-19 makes leadership and management more challenging than during so-called normal times, you may be surprised by what my friend, colleague and co-presenter Chris Rodgers has to say about what's really going on in our organisations day in and day out. And as my 86-year-old mother joked with me on Zoom last night, Dominic, she said, "How do you make God laugh?" And I said, "I don't know, Mother." And she said, "Tell him your plans." My name is Dominic Mahony. I am the Executive Chairman at Lane 4. I've been in post in the new role for me since the end of 2019. I spend my time consulting with clients, mainly senior executives and executive teams, as well as support our Managing Director, Adrian Morehouse, with external stakeholders and partners. I'm really delighted to be presenting today with Chris Rodgers, someone I've known for almost 20 years, and I can say that as a thinker on management and organisation, he's had a profound impact on me personally and on the practice of my colleagues here at Lane 4. Chris.
It's Chris Rodgers. I was originally an engineer and manager in the UK power industry for many years, initially working in power stations and later in the headquarters of what was then called National Power. I left in 1998 to become an independent consultant, and I had a book published on organisational change around 2007 called Informal Coalitions. And in 2008, I became Honorary Senior Visiting Fellow at Cass Business School. Over the years, I've worked a lot with Dominic and very much enjoyed working with him. Thanks, Dom.
Great, Chris, thanks. As we get going, I'd just like to encourage you all, please do use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screens to tap in any questions or comments that you've got throughout the webinar, and we will get time at the end to pick up on anything that you've said. But let's get going with our objectives. What do we hope to achieve in the next 30 minutes? Well, if like me, you are working hard to flex and adapt to the challenges of this COVID-19 crisis for your business, in the next 30 minutes, firstly, I hope that you will be reassured that actually what we are experiencing now is really an extreme version of the dynamics that leaders in business face day in and day out. And secondly, some really practical insights into how leaders can muddle through such complexity and uncertainty, provided they're willing to take on the challenge with purpose, courage and skill. And so with those words of introduction and these two objectives that we hope to cover in the next 30 minutes, let me pass to Chris to get into the content of today's webinar. Chris.
Thanks very much, Dominic. Hello, everybody. Our basic proposition is that organisations don't operate in the neatly packaged, predictable ways that conventional management suggests that they should. There's a philosopher called Alan Watts who, talking about the world at large, described it as wiggly, and he represented it with a wiggly line. It's my view, what I'm going to suggest to you today, that organisation is equally wiggly. So organisation effectively looks like this. This is what the world looks like. It's wiggly, but as managers, we don't like that. It makes us anxious. It's not what proper management is supposed to look like. And so we try to catch it in a net: strategies, structures, systems, procedures, and so on, and various tools and techniques, plug and play tools and techniques that give us a sense of order, predictability and control. But as Watts went on to say, the real world slips like water through our imaginary nets. However much we divide, count, sort, or classify this wiggling into particular things and events, this is no more than a way of thinking about the world. It's never actually divided, and nor is organization. So what are we talking about when we talk about the wiggliness? What we're talking about is the complex social process of everyday human interaction, where people are making sense of the world and taking action. And whatever happens, happens as a result of this process. So if we think about the process element of it first, this is an ongoing process of people organizing. There is no thing, the organization, which sits outside of this process. Organizations don't do things, people do. And what they're involved in doing is dealing with both what you might call the legitimate side of organization, the as-designed side, as well as the shadow, the hidden, messy, informal dynamics, which we're going to be talking a lot more about, which have a major impact on what happens. And this process is boundaryless. It doesn't stop at the edge of what we think of as the organization. So it's a social process. It's people interacting together. Through that process, they're co-creating the future together through their conversations. And they are interdependent. They're both enabled and constrained by each other, by what people do and don't do. And as they interact, they bring into play a lot of human characteristics, a wide range of human characteristics. They arrive with different interests, different intentions, different interpretations of what's going on, different ideologies, ways of seeing the world, if you like, and different identities that they relate to, as well as bringing their personal idiosyncrasies into play. So these differences, they're often competing as well, and there's a need, therefore, to deal with this difference. So politics, which is effectively coping with, managing with difference, is fundamental to organization. Nothing happens except through the exercise of politics. It's ever present, as is power, through this interdependent, enabling and constraining relationships. And as a final point on the social aspect, it's always personal and interpersonal. Nothing is impersonal, the way that we tend to try and get rid of some of the wiggliness by assuming it's impersonal. Everything is personal, interpersonal. And finally, because people are involved, it's complex. So it's a complex social process. Self-organizing patterning of interactions. There's no outside agent organizing what's going on. It's the individual local interactions. And by local, I mean small group, one-to-one interaction. So it might happen between me in the UK and somebody in Australia. That's still a local interaction. And what happens overall results from the widespread interplay of these local interactions. What does emerge is unknowable. And although everyone participates in this process in one way or another, nobody's in control of it. So as it suggests along the bottom of that slide, organization is reenacted continuously through self-organizing conversations. Dominic.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so in my experience, leaders who recognize these dynamics have a kind of different appreciation of the value of informal chats, water cooler type conversations, and are less frustrated by the formal side of communication being sort of mashed up in the rumour mill. And in the context of sort of coronavirus sort of lockdown, with levels of anxiety and uncertainty heightened and our personal individual fight-flight responses triggered, communication becomes 3, 4, 5 times as essential, as does modelling our own vulnerability to signal to the people we lead that it's okay to feel like this. And whether we're communicating formally, informally, in a structured way, in an unstructured way, all flexing our communication capabilities across all these different modes is really important. If you notice the business leaders who are adapting well to the crisis in food distribution, for instance, areas of manufacturing, home services such as gas and water, and there's some contrast then with some of the early slip-ups from some sectors, the pub sector, retail early on, tuning into these sort of complex social processes that are everyday part of organisation, organising is crucial if we're to keep people with us and make better decisions. After all, who could ever have imagined that people sitting and eating contaminated food in Wuhan, China, could possibly have led to the UK Prime Minister ending up in an intensive care unit in hospital? Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Just to put a bit more flesh then on this notion that organisation emerges in conversation. This next slide is meant to illustrate that. We have the formal interactions going on all the time where the notion is that we define the official ideology that we're looking for, the mission, the visions, etc., however we want to describe it, formal designs and developments of the organisation, and that this will lead to sought after outcomes. It will organise the way that people structure their interactions and will lead to the results we want. But what's going on at the same time is a lot of informal interactions, unplanned outcomes in terms of unforeseen reactions and responses from people. Shadow themes emerge about through rumours, through one-to-one conversations in corridors and so on, and people coalesce informally around these, and these organise the informal interactions. So what we end up overall with is a combination of both of these, Dom. Emergent outcomes, local practices emerge from these, and the actual results we get is a reflection of both of these, and they're interwoven, and I've shown them separately here to explain, but clearly these are interwoven. You don't operate in one or the other. These are intimately interlinked constantly in our day-to-day interactions. But there's one dimension that's missing from this that's vitally important and best looked at through the lens of organisational culture. So again, we've got our ongoing interactions. We have the formal designs and official ideology shown here. And so we have within that the culture as stated, the principles that reflect the culture as stated. So if you were to look in an annual report about what the culture of your organisation was, these are the sort of things that you would see. Alongside that, though, we have what people's actual local practices. And these are much less set, they are more diverse, more fragmented, reflecting both some of the official ideology, but also these informal interactions. And this is the culture as experienced. If you spoke to people out and about, they would talk in those sorts of terms, some of which, as I say, is openly expressed, some of which they're fully aware they're doing it, but they don't express it openly as part of the shadow side of the organisation, the local customs and practices. But then the final dimension, which is really important that we're adding to it now, is as people make sense of things in particular ways, the more that they make sense of things in a particular way, the more likely they are to continue making similar sense going forward. So patterns emerge, generalized tendencies to think and act in particular ways. And these then tend to channel the ongoing interactions. This is a very important dynamic because it enables people to go on together. If this didn't happen, you wouldn't have the concept of organisation at all. You have to think afresh each day before going to work about how you interact with people, what you do, what's normal, and so on. This becomes taken for granted, deeply ingrained. So I call this the deep culture. And this is based on precedent, what went before. There's a tension between the designed culture as stated and the emergent deep culture. The deep culture based on precedent will win out every time. And so managers need to get to grips with what's actually happening in this organizational shadow side. And the final point on this slide is to recognize that managers are in control of the organization's design, at least to the extent of being in charge of their particular part of it. They can design organizational structures and so on, but they're not in control at all of what's happening in the shadow side of the organization. Dom.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So in our work at Lane 4, this thinking has been really crucial in helping to broaden the conversations we have with clients about what's really going on culturally in their organization. So with an international advertising group who are looking to integrate numerous different agencies into a group, with UK Sport helping them to define what a winning culture looks like in an Olympic sport, so that can be shared, that best practice can be shared across all the different sports, with a major player in the UK hospitality sector to help them to define the relationship between their customer proposition, their external proposition, and their employee proposition, what it's like to work in this organization, this business. Recognizing these different layers of culture has been crucial, and will be even more so in recovering customers and ensuring that we have really top employee engagement post-COVID-19 as a crisis. Chris.
Thanks very much, Dom. Right, before moving on, can you go back a minute, Dom?
Yep.
Before moving on, I want to pick up on this fact that we're not in control as managers, because that begs the question, well, if we're not in control, what do we do? Well, the first point to say is we're actually already doing things, obviously, as managers, otherwise our organisation wouldn't operate at all. We wouldn't be operating at all. What we're doing, we're acting forwards, moment to moment, into this emerging future. And the phrase that I use for that, as Dom mentioned earlier, was what we're doing is through. The question is, how do we do this with greater awareness, with greater insight into what's actually going on, where we're more tuned in to the everyday lived reality that we're experiencing, because we're all walking case studies of this in practice. If we reflect on our own experience, we'll know that this is a situation that's going on, and how might we be better placed then to lead or manage? Okay, Dom? So what we want to do is to muddle through with, as we said in the headline, muddle through with purpose, courage and skill. So let's think about purpose first of all. I've identified four aspects of that here. With muddling through with a sense of purpose. Now, obviously, we have specific things that we're trying to achieve within our particular organizations. But if we're not in control as leaders and managers in an organization, then I'm suggesting that an aspect of our sense of purpose is to switch to one in which we are enabling people to perform. Doing so on purpose, which means acting deliberately with awareness and intention. Doing it purposefully, so we're doing it with determination and resilience, because things will inevitably turn out differently from the way that we intended. So we need to have what I call bounce back ability. And also, crucially, since the world's wiggly, we need to be able to do it purposively. In other words, participate in ways which are useful at the moment and at that particular time. So that's muddling through with purpose. Muddling through with courage. I'm going to draw on some work of Ralph Stacey here, who's works very heavily, or worked very heavily in this area, a leading thinker on a radical view of how organizations work. And in this particular sense, he talks about leaders and managers needing to have the courage to go on participating creatively despite not knowing. So that's fundamental to muddling through with purpose, courage and skill. Be able to keep engaged, keep participating creatively despite not knowing. And finally, muddling through with skill. And we can think of this in a number of aspects. First of all, the orientation to practice that we take. It says here parallel practice. I call it parallel practice because it reflects the paradoxical nature of organization, that we're both dealing with both the designed and the emergent, the formal and the informal, the structured and the unstructured, the paradox of being both in control and not in control all at the same time. So that needs to inform our whole practice. Suggested at the bottom some practical capabilities which are congruent with this complexity view of organization. Using our practical judgment. There are not any simple answers. If you do this, you'll get that answers. It's a matter of applying practical judgment as experience and the best knowledge that's around, and from that making judgments. Reframing communication, managers often talk about we need to get the message across. Well, that's not the primary concern. The primary concern is helping people to make better sense of what's going on. And that's shifting the emphasis from the formal structured communication to the informal, unstructured, everyday conversations, getting involved in that. Thinking culturally is about reflecting the fact that everything that managers say and do, including everything they don't say and don't do, sends messages to people, but it's the people on the receiving end who decide what those messages mean. So how managers behave day to day as role models is absolutely fundamental. And since politics is ever present, then acting politically, using your power ethically to shift the patterns of interaction in ways which you judge to be organisationally beneficial is fundamental, as is practicing reflexively. In other words, in the moment, reflecting on what's actually going on, remaining aware of what's going on, your part in it, and also reflecting after the event to see what lessons might be learned. So there's some of the capabilities that you need to develop and deploy. The mode of operation in this world is what I call imaginatively making do. The French have a word for it, a bricolage, which essentially relates to craft work that can be applied in the notion of leadership and management. So it's about imaginatively making do with the resources that you have available at the time, given the situations you're facing. So acting as a bricoleur. And then finally, where does that leave us in terms of things like tools and techniques? We've said tools and techniques don't work. Certainly there are no plug and play tools and techniques that will help you get through the complexities of organization that we're describing here. But you all do already have your personal practice theory, rules of thumb that help you navigate through this world. So I'm suggesting here that you need to develop further your practical, personal set of rules of thumb that you apply pragmatically in the moment. They need to be yours, not anybody else's. But I've given a few examples of things that I pay attention to down the right-hand side there. Creatively cutting and pasting says, yeah, don't throw all the tools and techniques out of the window. Cut and paste the things that work for you, things that you find helpful, that your team members find helpful, if you're a consultant, that your clients find helpful, and so on. Creatively using these. Hosting conversations, bringing people together around important themes. Providing vision. That's not a vision, but providing vision, helping people to see better, given the circumstances that apply at the moment. And one of the people you might be helping to see better is yourself. Mobilizing coalitions of support for things that you think are beneficial. So it's not about rolling things out in the way that we typically do. It's about pushing at half-open doors. It's about bringing people together around those themes. And the final one I've got here, keep chipping away. There's a story, Michelangelo was asked, apparently, how he managed to sculpt his statue of David from this huge block of marble. He says, it's easy. You just keep chipping away the bits that don't look like David. So when you understand what your purpose is, the things you're trying to achieve, if things don't resonate with that, then chip them away. Dominic.
Great. So what Chris has been talking about, I think, is kind of summarised by this slide. In a moment, I'm going to field any questions that you posted in the chat box. I can see one or two comments. Thank you very much. So do tap away in the chat box if you've got a question for Chris or I. But for me, this slide kind of is the core of what Chris has to say about leading in a rapidly changing world, I guess really brought into focus by COVID-19. That articulating purpose and guiding managers to make strategic choices with courage and skill. It's as much as any executive, any human being can be asked to do right now. And mixing logic with gut feel is also crucial. And I'm sort of reminded of the famous story about the turnaround of Apple by Steve Jobs in the late 1990s. You know, after he come back into the business. He'd slashed the number of products that they were producing to just 8 products, and had virtually no inventory and lots of talented people seemingly underemployed. He was asked, okay, so Steve, what's your strategy? And he replied, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. Well, the next big thing turned out to be the iPod, iTunes, iPhone, and the rest is history. So what might be the next big thing off the back of COVID-19 for your industry, for your sector? How might you lead with purpose, courage, and skill to realize it? What does courage look like for you right now? What skills do you recognize as being crucial right now? How do you articulate your purpose at this crucial moment? All of these are what I get from listening to Chris talk about muddling through with purpose, courage, and skill. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time. We've got a few more minutes, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat box as well. So in terms of sort of taking a couple of questions, nice comment from Glenn, Chris. Glenn Regan, I hope I've pronounced your name right, Glenn. How important are seemingly innocuous decisions on culture? For example, choosing to charge employees for tea and coffee, which might impact feelings towards the organisation and reduce that coffee machine chat.
That's a question to me, Dom. Yeah. Well, I think it's absolutely fundamental. This is the part about where I was saying about thinking culturally. Before doing that sort of thing, a very simple thing to do, but it sends messages to people which the managers or who are in control of that decision aren't in control of how people make sense of it. And as you say, it sends messages that are then spread through the conversational interactions that we're talking about. People make sense of it. They create a view of the organization, how it deals with staff and issues like that. The management might have been taking it on the basis of simple economics, but it's not going to stick at that level. So understanding the shadow side conversations that go on as a result of that is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'll just take one more. There's a nice comment here about, how do you enable culture when working remotely during COVID-19? I mean, if I just sort of chip in my thoughts here, at Lane 4, we pride ourselves in our kind of family culture, and I have been amazed at the creativity, the way that we have managed to host different activities on Teams, lunchtime activities, learning activities, social activities, even amongst some of our colleagues who are on furlough leave. So, really making the most of living your culture, even if you have to do so through another means. Chris, anything you'd add to that?
Well, I think you said it there, Dominic. Clearly, my point was you can't design and build culture. It's an emergent outcome of people's interactions. So if you can facilitate those interactions so that people are still connected and still able to interact in productive ways, and also use the opportunity that might emerge of new ways of interacting, then that's making the best of a bad job, if you like, in terms of COVID-19. But you can't design and build culture. It emerges from people's ongoing interactions, as does leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Look, I'm very conscious of people's time. We're at the end of our 30 minutes. So my kind of final slide is just to say to you, look, if you are intrigued by today's webinar, and as Chris likes to call it, you've very much had what he calls a microwave version. Please do get in touch. We'd be delighted to craft or tailor a session for you and your organisation. Likewise, click onto our content on the Lane 4 website and get access to a whole series of resources that we've got there, which we put up to help you through this current crisis. And look out for Chris's book that will be coming out, I keep saying in the near future, but Informal Coalitions you can get right now. Please, we've been delighted to present to you today, and please stay healthy and well during these difficult times. We're listening to your challenges and concerns, and we'll continue to run webinars on a bi-weekly basis. On the 7th of May, we will be running our next webinar on maintaining motivation in your workforce. Our MD, Adrian Morehouse, and Consultant Delivery Director, Paul Jewett-Harris, will be running that. So keep an eye out on social channels for that. Thank you, everyone, for your time, attention, and participation. Goodbye, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.